Welcome to Between Sundays, a podcast from Union Grove Baptist Church where we take the truths we talk about on Sunday and bring them into everyday life. Because faith isn't just for one day of the week, it's for all of them. I'm your host, David Jane, and each episode we'll sit down with our pastors to unpack how God's Word meets us right where we are, at work, at home, in our relationships, and in the real stuff of life. Thanks for joining us as we learn how to live out our faith between Sundays. All right, guys, welcome to UG Between Sundays, the podcast where we can dive a little deeper into the things that we learn from Sunday and also make these practical applications between Sundays. Today, we're joined by Pastor Bailey, and because the first two episodes we didn't do this with you, and we did it with David last week, I wanted to do some rapid fire kind of get to know you questions with you, Pastor Bailey, and so I'll say the question. You answer, Pastor Josh, and then me, and then we'll go several questions.
I like that he has to answer first.
Yeah, I know.
Gives you time to think. Okay, so a childhood memory that sticks with you.
I got so many of them. Probably growing up on a farm with my grandparents. I have a lot of great memories of helping them, learning the work ethic. As a young kid, he had a tobacco farm, and then he also grew a lot of vegetables and stuff.
Nice.
And to this day, I probably still eat about what he grew because I grew up with that. So that's a great memory for me.
Like you, I have several, so trying to think through. I have one that just kind of came to my mind that is kind of wild. I'm going to tell you the story, so it'll take just a second. But it's just how times have changed. I love doing fun things with my son, and one of the reasons I love that is because my dad did a lot of fun things with me. So he'd take me to games, which is something what I love to do with Cameron, my son. And so my dad's an NC State alumni, so we went to an NC State basketball game, and we were there one night, and like any other kid, I want autographs, I want things like that. So my dad was willing to stay around and wait, so we waited outside of where the players come out, and there was a lot of other people doing the same thing, and but we were determined, and my dad knew it meant something to me, so he stuck around, like we were staying there till really late. And everybody just slowly started leaving because they're like, we got to get home, whatever. Well, my dad was like, hey, this means something to my son, so we're going to stay. And sure enough, the security officer came out of the locker room, and he asked my dad, he said, would you and your son like to go into the locker room at NC State and talk to the players? Like, that would never happen today.
Yeah.
Like, Cameron and I stick around with Cameron to do this kind of thing. Never happened. But, so seriously, we went in there. This is mid-90s, so probably if you're a Wolfpack fan, probably like I think Isaiah Benjamin was on the team, Todd Fuller, people like that. And we walked right into the locker room. I went up to each individual locker while the guys were sitting there and just talking to them and got their autographs and stuff like that. Just wild. And so, yeah, that's probably one thing. I was probably 10, something like that. Yeah.
I'll go with an embarrassing one. I was in elementary school at church after the service was done, and I was using the bathroom in the stall, so make your assumptions. And someone came in and opened the door because it wouldn't lock. So, like, to this day, there's, like, a fear that the thing won't lock. So I just, like, always think about that.
Yeah.
Like, oh, man.
Hey.
Okay. So, favorite meal of the day?
Favorite meal of the day? Supper.
I'd go breakfast. I eat the same thing every day.
What is it?
Sausage and eggs mixed every single day.
I love breakfast food, but I usually skip it and have a light lunch so I can eat a lot at dinner. That's like my favorite thing is when we that's like our wind down for me and Morgan is when we kind of relax. And so like if we do make it a point to eat dinner at the table a lot of times, but then kind of like my favorite selfishly is when we have it at the couch and are like watching a movie or something. So that's always fun, and then I usually have like a second dinner if I've done good at not eating the other part of the day. So that's like
I'm not gonna lie though. I love when we all go out to lunch.
Yeah.
And I would love to do that like every day. If I had unlimited money, that's
Yes,
what I'd do.
yeah.
I'd go out every day for lunch
Yeah.
with everybody. So
I like supper, I think, because I actually could do it with your family. Breakfast, you're rushing. Lunch is normally whatever you can get at work or whatever. But supper time, like you said, you sit down with your wife.
I
My
think
kids are
it's-
grown now, so they're not there anymore, but I always love the supper time.
I think
like
it's stage
that.
of life that your family's
Yeah.
at too. Like I think me and my wife, we were way more common. We love that. You guys as well. My kids right now, every evening we're on the go, sports and stuff.
Yeah.
And so it's like, that's why I don't enjoy it, because most of the time it's like concession stand food.
Real
So
good
that's
for
why,
you.
yeah. So it's more like breakfast.
Nice. So, a book that you would recommend, Christian, fiction, whatever, other than the Bible. Because
Oh, man. That's my favorite book. Oh, goodness. The one, I can't think of the name of it. You go, Pastor.
I will say, so I mean, obviously we all have different,
Sorry, can I interrupt you? Last week you said Gospel by J.D. Greer. Don't say that one.
okay, yeah. That's probably the most impactful book outside of the Bible. I would say I love the book Christian Atheist by Craig Rochelle. That would be one that I would highly recommend. And then if you've never read Gentle and Lowly by Dane Ortlund, that's one of my favorites. I read that 2 years ago. Great devotional book, but it's not really for your devotion. It's just a good book to read for that. That would be another one. And then just because we're talking about the Sabbath a little bit today in today's podcast, I would read The Ruthless Elimination of Hurry by Comer. That's a really good book as well that I read in last year.
He does a lot more reading than I do, but I thoroughly enjoyed a well-known author. Hadn't written a lot of books, but man, I enjoyed the Truth Network.
It's Epperson.
Epperson,
Yeah, I've
yes.
read those.
Yeah.
I read
Stu
that when I
Epperson.
preached through the words from
Yeah,
the cross.
yeah.
I borrowed it from you
Yeah.
because that was a fantastic. He hasn't written a whole lot of books,
I know,
but I
but
was
he-
like, man, Stu Epperson. I mean,
Yeah. He's not, but it was just very practical. But yet
fantastic.
he brought out things like I never thought about that.
Right.
So
Yeah.
thoroughly enjoyed those.
I said Chronicles of Narnia last week, and I stopped you from saying the one you said last week, but I will say this is like out of left field, and it couldn't be for everybody, but if you like fantasy stuff, there's this book called Aragon. That's one part of a 4-part series. It's similar to your Chronicles of Narnia, like dragons and elves, kind of like Lord of the Rings, except just different characters. But yeah, I wouldn't say it to everybody, but I did enjoy those growing up.
Your book genre is a little different than mine. I can already tell and stuff. When you said dragons and all this kind of,
I'm like kind of still a child at heart.
it's okay, man. Hey, it's all good.
So last one, first job ever. And I remember this very vividly, so I'll go first and then Pastor Bailey. But my mom made it a point to get a picture of me mowing my neighbor's yard with the $20 he gave me. And so it was like the first kind of yard other than ours that we mowed on with like our Craftsman, like 1999, riding lawnmower. So that was my technical first job.
Yeah.
My first job was working on Grandpa's farm for a long time. I was, I don't know, early teens. I think about it often because I asked Grandpa, I said, Grandpa, you pay other people, to work on the farm, to prime the tobacco and work all day. And I said, well, why don't you pay me? And he looked at me, he says, boy, he says, you sit your feet at my table, you'll get your payment. But then later on, Grandma talked him in, and I think I may have made $1.50 an hour, which was nothing in comparison. But that was my first job. And then cutting wood with my uncle, $5 a load, worked half a day for $5 a load.
Well, my uncle has a farm, so when I was younger, since you guys kind of referenced this, I did go there for 2 weeks in the summer a couple of times to work there. So that would be the first time I really made money off of something when I was a younger teen. But my first consistent job was at a greenhouse, and I was a friend of the family, so I worked there. I was kind of like grounds. And so that's what I did. I did a little bit of sales, but mostly I just helped around the, making sure pulling weeds and all that stuff, the things they didn't want to do. And so I worked there pretty consistently from age 15 till I graduated high school.
Nice. So, kind of getting into the topics today, I'll just give a brief kind of summary of how I arrived to this because the first part of our conversation doesn't really include the Sabbath as to how we can apply this to our week, which is what this podcast is all about. But I'll just kind of explain my thought process. A couple years ago, there was a guy who I went to his gym. He owned the gym, and so we just got to talking. He was a Christian, but he still followed the law. And we're talking the diet, the feasts, and the Sabbath. But the gateway for him to arrive at that for his family and his group of friends was the Sabbath. And so you just preached on the fourth commandment, the Sabbath, this past Sunday. And the Sabbath was kind of the thought-provoking thing of like, man, are we really supposed to do that? Because God said this is his day. He said, keep it holy. But he also made a lot of other things, told the Israelites that they were holy. And so I kind of comprised a few questions and like, let's not spend a lot of time on them, but just kind of for those nerds out there who are, they see the law and, someone might wonder why we don't keep it today because guys after Jesus ascended into heaven still kept the law. And that was their nationality and kind of the way that we're grafted into the promise of Jesus Christ, that he gives us salvation. Why wouldn't we still do the things that Jesus did? So that's the premise for these questions. And the first one is, while we are not held accountable to the law, we're under grace. 1 John 2:6 says, whoever says he abides in him ought to walk in the same way in which he walked. So that's what this verse says. And Jesus himself kept the Sabbath, ate clean, and honored the feasts. So doesn't that imply we should still follow him in these ways? And before y'all answer, I just want to say these are the questions that in our dialogue that he would ask me. And I'm like, man, I don't really have an answer for this stuff. Mm-hmm. So what do y'all think about this first question, this walk as Jesus walked?
I mean, it's a great question. I think going back to what you said, kind of setting up this question about Romans 11 and how we're grafted in, I think it's important that we recognize that we're grafted into the family of God, not the Jewish family. And fundamentally, when you see that, I think understanding that Jewish tradition, which is the law, Judaism. And I think it's important that you understand, like, okay, when we were grafted into his family, it doesn't mean that we have to go back and keep all these forms of the law. We're grafted into the family of God, and there's some of those rituals that you don't have to keep. I mentioned this in our sermon that all the Old Testament law, there's over 600 laws. They can be categorized as God's moral law, God's ceremonial laws, and God's dietary laws, or whatever. And Israel had to keep all of these things. And so I believe that the New Testament, when Christ came and he died for us, he fulfilled the law. And so now we are not under the law, we're under grace. So what the question really is stemmed from that. Like, what does that really look like? What does that really mean? What does that look like day to day and that kind of thing? And so what I would say is, Paul talking to Corinth, he talks about the fact that Jesus fulfilled the feast. So the 7 Jewish feasts, Jesus fulfilled those and he became those. So like we're not under the obligation of having to abide by those and also the dietary laws and stuff like that. But I think what Jesus meant by, be like me and live like me, I think he meant in his behaviors and his like life, his moral law, which would be kind of what we're talking about in Exodus chapter number 20. And so that's what, kind of a roundabout way of getting to an answer. That's kind of what I think he's talking about. And so when you think of God's moral law, I think the Sabbath is part of God's moral law. And not that, we have to abide by it in exactly the way the Old Testament says we have to, but I think keeping a Sabbath and recognizing the Sabbath and also like all of us having a Sabbath in our lives is important. So.
Yeah. I mean, but when I think of the law. In my thinking, Jesus had, not Jesus, but of course, being the second part of the Trinity, when the law was given, I think some of it was to help protect the people because they were going in all these different lands with all these different gods, all the different, and I think he was trying to protect them from some things that they didn't know that was going to affect them. Of course, later on we could see how it affected them. They were serving many gods, and goodness, they were in captivity in Egypt 400 years. When Moses was gone, boom, hey, build us a golden calf, because the influence was there. So I was thinking, it's a guide rule. It's a help to help us not get into those things that would be contrary to what God would want any of us to do. I mean, the examples. I mean, how far can you take it? You could take it too far one way or the other. I mean, like to be like Jesus. Well, Jesus was never married. Does that mean I don't have to be married? I mean, there's a balance, I believe, and I believe the Word of God is perfectly balanced. Yeah, we have the law, but then we have grace, and I can abide by the principles, apply the grace, and live a balanced life. I mean, all of us, when man gets involved, it always goes awry. It always goes too far one way or the other. So God gave us a simple principle I believe, to follow, and use it apart as our lives are guided, through the help of the Holy Spirit about what I should do, what I shouldn't do. But that's my thought process.
Yeah. So I want to move on to kind of the practical application of this, which was our intention for this podcast. But I thought it would be neat to have that discussion just because I've heard it at least before. So just on the chance that someone encounters this in the future. So there are some things that I want to change in my life because of kind of these conversations I had before with this guy. Like, it just got me thinking. And then there's some videos that I've watched of where people talk about the Sabbath. They kind of say like, hey, Christianity today is like 9 out of 10 on the 10 Commandments, and we don't follow the Sabbath because it's not in our culture anymore. And there's a lot of things in Jewish culture we don't do. So that's kind of their explaining it away, which I think is wrong. And so it's something that I don't want to say struggled with the past couple years, but have thought about and finally see the need to make a change in my life. So one of the idols that I think of, and we've talked about, is our phone. And it's not that I, set my phone up on this table and I pray to it or bow my knees to it, but there's something to be said about our screen time and how much time we spend with this rectangle in our hands looking down at it. And there's a lot of great things that can come out of phones. And that's not even what I'm going to change. I'm not going to get rid of my phone and go to a Nokia or whatever. But one thing I do want to do is cut it out of a day and take that day of rest and not look at my phone. So the reason for this is because I do think we need to focus on a Sabbath. And one of the things you mentioned in your message yesterday was that as staff, like full-time staff, Sundays isn't necessarily a day that we can just come and happy-go-lucky. And, we kind of have to make sure we're working.
Yeah.
So there needs to be another day, and you talked about that. But for Saturday, in my personal life, I just like to give a background as to how I've gotten to this point. So me and Morgan have been in the ministry in some capacity, part-time, full-time. The majority of our marriage has been, I've part-time been in the ministry, full-time had another job. I might have done a couple of things on the side, and one of those things might take up a work day on Saturday. So I have Monday through Friday I'm working, Saturday I'm working, Sunday I'm technically working. I might go back to the church later and do some lessons or something like that. So there were some times where I wouldn't give myself that break, and I would be pulled away from my family. And the reason I wanted to work so much was because in ministry you never make a lot of money to where you have extra. So I've always wanted to do what we can, and we're better than most at finances. Like, I'll just say that. Like, we're really good with our money, but that's because we've lived significantly under like median household income for our entire marriage. So I want to commend my wife who does handle our finances. And like, with that being said, I've realized I need to take a day, put my phone away, turn it off, spend time with my family, read my Bible, just worship, because you said the Bible links worship and rest, and that recharges you. And I heard Charlie Kirk actually talk about this too, just the importance that he gets to be with his family and he doesn't look at his phone. And social media is like a problem that I have too. I can just, we're watching a show, a 2-minute ad break comes on, and I pull out my phone just to like occupy my mind with something. And so I want to at least take a day, and I'm just being transparent here, that maybe call it Friday night to like Saturday evening, because there's still some stuff I do Saturday night in preparation for Sunday, just to make sure everything's good to go. But that kind of, I mean, which actually lines up with the observance of the Sabbath, Friday evening to kind of Saturday evening. So that's something that I've taken from this, and I appreciate your messages talking about this to the point where it shows me that I need to make a change. So I appreciate that. That I think is a practical application that other people can draw from. And that's just me being honest of what I'm going to do in the future. Do y'all pull any things from, I mean, we're only 4 commandments in, so, we can revisit this at 8 or 10, but what are some things that y'all think people could do in addition?
So I learned a lot this week studying for the Sabbath sermon, because I've always heard about it. All the other commandments are so in your face, very simple, very agreeable. Like, we're not questioning, should you have more gods or gods above him? Of course not, So in the evangelical world, we've never questioned, but this is by far the most controversial commandment. It's how do we observe it? If all the other, you referenced the video that you watch where it's kind of like we abide by 9, but that other 10th one, we're kind of like, So here's what I'll say. Jesus said in the New Testament, he said, the Sabbath was made for man. Okay. And what we learn from Scripture is that the Sabbath is a time of remembrance and a time of rest. Okay. So when you put all of that together, Sabbath was made for us. We need it. You need it. You need it. You need it. Every person watching, they all need it. No matter how hard you think you work, no matter how energetic you think you are, you need it. So if we look at that and then we take remembrance and rest and we merge those together, then what I come out on the other side believing is that all of us need a day where we worship and rest. Your body needs it. And I think, it should be Sunday, but I also understand that some people's lives, their jobs are out of necessity wherever they work and they have to work on Sunday. And so my advice to them would be, have a day where you can truly have a Sabbath, where you reflect, you remember, you kind of think about how Christ has delivered you from the power of sin and the bondage of sin. And then you also let your body rest. In your case, what you're referencing with putting your phone away is you're letting your mind rest, which is so important, because what we do in our culture is we are so busy. So we constantly, so when you see like a commercial and you naturally pull up your phone, you want your mind to keep going. You don't know how. Like, my kids don't even know how to be bored anymore. They have to fill their time. And so it's kind of like, okay, so we are so busy, and what God is saying is this: I want you to take a day where I want you to rest. That's why worship and rest are so, together. Because I mentioned this in the sermon. Many people are so busy on Sunday that they come to church and they're already thinking about what they got to do that afternoon or that evening and stuff. They don't have time to even stop and think about, hey, what does God have for me today? Or what has God done for me on the cross? And all this kind of stuff. They don't have time to reflect upon that because they're just like thinking about everything. Their mind can't turn off. So that's why he's saying take a full day to rest, because when we rest and we put our phones down, we spend time with our family, our minds are not working, we're not checking emails. Because for me, that's where I struggle. There is always an email to respond to, there's always a text message to respond to, there's always a phone call that needs to be made, and there's always a little bit more study that I could do for the next sermon. If I'm not careful, I could literally be working 7 days a week all day in the evenings. The school's wanting me at events all the time. I'm on the board of the Winston-Salem Rescue Mission. They need me for stuff. There's a pressure that we have to be at all of these different things. So I got people inviting me to stuff every single evening of the week. And if you're not careful, what happens is your mind gets so busy and it never turns off, and you never give your body a time to rest, and you aren't really being with your family, which is my first ministry. It's not Union Grove, it's them. And what happens is like you kind of get so busy. So what God's saying is this: the Sabbath was made for us. The reason that he instituted it was for us. We all need it. So the first thing we need to do is recognize we all need it.
Yeah.
And then take it. And that means, like, for us, we all work on Sunday. So give ourselves a day. And a lot of times we have activities on Saturday. So it's like, hey, take you a day during the week. Our pastors deserve this in our culture. And then also every listener, whatever their work routine looks like, they need a day where they can be off and learn to be off. And on that day, try to reflect, try to remember, try not to just fill it with a ton of busy stuff, and try to rest and remember.
What do you think, Pastor Bailey?
I know for me, of course, I've been on a different stage of life than y'all were with kids, and so now it's just me and Michelle. But me and Pastor are similar. Like for me on Saturday nights, I don't want to do anything late. We do things, but I want to be done early. I want to be able to get a good night's rest so that when I come to church, and Pastor was just saying the exact same thing yesterday, that I enjoy doing things. I enjoy being around people, but if I'm up late, then the next morning I'm struggling. I can't pay attention, and I can't get what God has for me. And I personally try to treat Sunday as a different day. That's my day when this time I may go out and wash car. No, this day's Sunday. I'm not going to do it on Sunday. I mean, not that God would zap me if I wash my car on Sunday, but I grew up, Sunday is a day when it's different. I mean, I can remember my grandparents, and they weren't Christians, but like, oh, let's go take a drive. They want to do something different. Well, for me, it's a day of worship. Yeah, at church it can be busy and so forth, and sometimes we all know now you're up there preaching and teaching and so forth. But when our phones are okay, what's going on? Something's happened. I almost feel guilty looking at my phone during the service, because I don't want people thinking, well, I'm scrolling or whatever. That's not my intent. But there are times, even in worship, we get bothered, or it's just what it is. But I want to focus on worship. I want to focus on singing. I want to focus on the message that God has for me. And then that afternoon, then I want to rest. Because as Pastor said, and I've thought of it that way, I never really equated rest and worship together. But if I'm so exhausted, then I can't worship. And I've been there where you're out late at night, and then the next morning you can't hardly keep your eyes open or whatever.
Like when you bow to pray,
yeah,
and you're so tired, you kind of drift.
Yeah.
And then you're like, what was I saying to the Lord? It's like, that's when you know, like, you need to take your Sabbath.
Yeah. And for me, I love Sundays because yesterday I did the things that needed to be done, but then I was able to just rest and relax and get my battery charged for what's coming up the next week. But I think it's neat for all of us, but we live in a busy, busy world. And I know y'all are more busy with the kids your age, but when my kids are that age, it was constant going and doing, and especially when they get into sports and stuff. But to set it aside, you have to work at it.
And I think, like, for our listeners, and especially our church people, it's not supposed to be burdensome. I said that in the sermon. It's not supposed to be, the Sabbath isn't supposed to be burdensome. It's supposed to benefit us. And that's the key, because a lot of us, if you left the sermon, or you're thinking today about all the list of shouldn't I do this, whatever, I think it's a good way to healthy evaluate some things. But if it's added burden on you, then you've probably missed the point of the Sabbath, because it's supposed to benefit us. So take some time, figure out what that looks like in each of your schedule, and try and take some time to rest and to remember what Christ has done for you. And so should you eat out on Sunday? If that is a way that you rest, then yeah. Like, what's amazing is, like, think about it. You go home and you make lunch at your own house. That's great too. But here's what I'll tell you. It might be more burdensome than just going somewhere. And I'm not vouching for either one. All I'm
Right.
saying is it's different for different people. Some people actually love to do those things, and they feel rejuvenated when they make a big lunch and serve people. If that's it, then that might be the best way that you need to spend your Sabbath is just making food. But if it becomes a burden, then maybe you should consider another option where you can go and just relax and rest and turn your mind off and turn things off that way. And so I would say that about playing sports and stuff. Here's what we do, and you might look at it differently. That's fine. We just don't like for it to ever be a habit. So if like one time a season my son gets scheduled to play on a Sunday or whatever, we're not gonna like quit the team and just bless
Yeah.
God. We're gonna whatever and stuff. We're not. It's okay. I mean, but here's what I'll tell you: if it becomes a regular habit that he's missing something like the Sabbath and a day where we love as a family to be together and to remember and rest, then we would have to stop. That's why travel ball, we started travel ball and we said no to like 5 different travel ball teams that had reached out to me in the last several years because they were big on weekends. We found one that does a lot on Friday, Saturday type stuff, and they very rarely do Sunday. So it's really been a blessing to us. So my son can do something that he loves, but still recognize the Sabbath as an important routine for our family and that kind of thing. And here's what I'll say. The last thing I'll say on this, and I know we've gone a little bit long, and I hope that's okay. Church can become burdensome. I'm just going to say that. I don't want to open up a can with this, but here's what I want to tell you is like the culture I grew up in, we went to Sunday school, we went to church on Sunday right after Sunday school. And then that afternoon, you normally went to lunch or home for a little bit. Then you came back, you had choir practice, you had evening service, then you had this, you had whatever. And all I'm going to tell you is, I mean, it's like a lot of people growing up, it's like, man, Sunday was one of our busiest days.
Yeah.
And I think we, as a church, the church culture needs to rethink that. Because if it becomes burdensome or it becomes like where you drag on Sunday or you kind of just like you're dragging and you're exhausted and you're tired and you go into your Monday and you just feel like, man, like I am more exhausted than I was when the weekend started or whatever, then you've probably missed the Sabbath. That's why I love our church culture because I focus so heavily on Sunday morning. And I'm busy. I mean, I get there at 6:45 in the morning and I teach 3 times every Sunday, which is exhausting. And I go home and I chill. I love to go to lunch with people and stuff like that. And then I come home and I rest, whatever. And the evening we kind of do different things, but there's some Sundays I'm so grateful for the Sundays where we have nothing going on in the evening where I can come home and relax with my family. Because I very rarely get that during the week. And that's our opportunity to rest and to remember because the Sabbath was made for us.
And I do think I want to like encourage people too that, God talks about testing him, giving as a principle of Christianity. Now, when we talk about the Sabbath as a principle of Christianity and implementing this, you mentioned something that kind of hit me on Sunday when you said that even in Jewish culture, they use that extra work day to make more income. And so by sacrificing that, you're really relying on God to provide your needs. And that spoke right into me because that's what I would always use as my excuse to work on Saturday. And so I really think leaning into this, God will bless that sacrifice that you make, whether it be your time, whether it be your finances. I do think he will do that just to encourage people.
Yeah, no, I agree. And I'm glad you pointed that out because that was one of the things Israel struggled. They're like, man, for us to provide for our family, we need that 7th day.
Yeah.
We need it. And so when the economy gets tough and inflation hits households, what do they think? Man, I need to pick up an extra shift on that one day that I have off.
Mm-hmm.
I need to pick it up because that just makes sense from a business perspective. It's like you're going to make more money in 7 days than you would in 6 or in 5. It makes sense. But God said, hold on. Your body needs rest. The Sabbath was created for man, not man for the Sabbath. And so you need to take some time, rest, and remember. And what you do is you rest in who he is. He says, come unto me, all ye that are weary and heavy laden, and I will give you rest. Yeah. He's fulfilled that for us. But then also you remember what he has done for you, and it forces you to trust God that, hey, I'm going to work really hard for 5 or 6 days, but I'm trusting him to provide for that extra day.
Mm-hmm.
and I'm going to give it to him.
Well, that's all we have for today, guys. If you do have a question, email it to djayne, DJAYNE at ugbconline.com. And looking forward to getting some questions so we can actually talk about some real things that people are wondering about, and maybe a couple topics even for bonus episodes that we can talk about. But yeah, I'll see y'all next week.
Beyond my sin and beyond